Welcome to a story about hidden communities, systemic failure, and the reforms that changed a nation. This is the true account of the Goler case from Nova Scotia, Canada, a tragedy that forced an entire country to rethink how it protects its most vulnerable citizens. Deep in the wilderness of Nova Scotia lies South Mountain. In the 1980s, this isolated area became the center of one of Canada's most important child welfare cases. What was discovered there led to nationwide reforms that still protect children today. This is not a story about sensationalism. It's about what happens when society looks away, and what we can learn to prevent such tragedies from happening again. South Mountain overlooks the beautiful Annapolis Valley in Nova Scotia. Below the mountain, fertile farmland stretches for miles. Apple orchards bloom each spring, and small towns prosper. But on the mountain itself, life was completely different. Since the 1800s, the Goler family had lived on South Mountain in extreme poverty and isolation. They were descendants of poor settlers who moved away from towns and built rough shelters in the wilderness. By the 1970s, about 20 people from multiple generations lived in two run-down cabins. These structures were built from scrap wood and had no electricity, no running water, and no proper sanitation. The family survived on government welfare and occasional farm work. The Golers were known to people in nearby towns like Wolfville and Kentville, but they were seen as mountain people, poor, uneducated, and best avoided. Local authorities knew the family existed. Social workers had visited over the years and filed reports about extreme poverty and poor living conditions. But no meaningful help ever arrived. It was easier to file paperwork than to truly intervene. Geographic isolation became social isolation. Children grew up without attending school. Adults had limited understanding of the world beyond the mountain. Some family members had intellectual disabilities that were never addressed by medical professionals. Without education, without guidance from teachers or social workers, without connection to the broader community, normal social boundaries began to break down over generations. This wasn't a sudden collapse. It happened slowly over decades as one generation passed its struggles to the next without intervention. In 1984, everything changed. A 14-year-old girl walked into her rural school and spoke to a teacher. What she described was a childhood without safety, without protection, without any understanding that her life was not normal. Her courage to speak up broke more than a century of silence. Her disclosure led to an immediate investigation. Police and social workers climbed South Mountain expecting to find poverty. What they discovered was evidence of systematic, long-term abuse involving multiple family members across several generations. Children described lives where basic safety didn't exist. Many were too young to understand that what they'd experienced was wrong. It was simply all they had ever known. 16 adults were eventually arrested and charged with numerous offenses. During police questioning, some family members openly admitted to their actions. They didn't understand why authorities were concerned. In their isolated world, cut off from normal society for so long, these patterns had become normalized. This revealed something deeply disturbing. When families are completely isolated from education and social services for generations, even basic concepts of right and wrong can be lost. The trials took place in Kings County, Nova Scotia. The small courthouse had never handled anything like this before. 13 individuals were eventually convicted, receiving prison sentences ranging from 1 to 7 years. But the trials raised uncomfortable questions. How do you assign blame when entire generations have been abandoned by society? Many of the accused had severe intellectual disabilities and genuinely didn't comprehend the gravity of their actions. The children were immediately removed from the mountain and placed in foster care across Nova Scotia. Many arrived malnourished, silent, and deeply traumatized. They had never known regular meals, safe beds, or what normal family life looked like. Child psychologists and social workers began the long process of helping them heal. With time, care, and proper counseling, many of these children began to recover. They started to trust adults. They learned to play. They discovered what safety felt like for the first time in their lives. The case sparked national outrage, not just at the family, but at the systems that had failed them for over a century. Canadians across the country asked difficult questions. How had an entire family lived in such conditions without intervention? Why had decades of reports about extreme poverty never led to meaningful action? How many other isolated families might be suffering in silence? The Goler case became a major turning point in Canadian social policy. Nova Scotia's Department of Community Services immediately expanded its child protection programs. They doubled the number of field officers assigned to rural areas. New policies required that every report of suspected abuse or neglect be investigated in person, not just documented in files. Teachers across the province received specialized training to identify warning signs of abuse and neglect. They learned to watch for subtle indicators. Children who are consistently hungry, fearful, withdrawn, or who miss school frequently without explanation. Mandatory reporting laws were strengthened. Educators became legally required to report any suspicions of abuse or neglect. Failure to report could result in legal consequences. The justice system introduced stricter sentencing guidelines for repeat offenders. Loopholes that had allowed convicted abusers to remain near children after release were closed. Media organizations established new ethical guidelines for reporting on child abuse cases. Survivor identities would be protected by law. Reporting would focus on systemic issues and solutions rather than sensational details. Across Nova Scotia, a new principle emerged: no child unseen. This became the guiding philosophy for social workers, teachers, law enforcement, and healthcare providers. Every child, no matter how remote their location, deserved to be seen, known, and protected. One survivor, known publicly only as Donna, showed extraordinary courage. Despite the trauma of her childhood, she began speaking publicly about her experiences in the mid-1990s. Her goal wasn't sympathy, it was change. Donna testified before lawmakers, appeared in educational documentaries, and worked with social service organizations. Her advocacy directly influenced amendments to Canada's criminal code and helped shape child welfare programs across the country. She proved that survivors can reclaim their voices and transform their pain into protection for others. Her message was simple but powerful: no child should ever grow up unseen. The Goler case has been studied extensively in universities across North America and Europe. It appears in social work curricula as an essential lesson about the importance of early intervention. Researchers coined the term intergenerational isolation syndrome to describe what happened on South Mountain. When families become completely cut off from mainstream society for generations, normal social and moral structures can erode. Sociologists use the case to teach an important principle: extreme poverty doesn't just create material hardship. When combined with total isolation, it can lead to the breakdown of family structures and the loss of basic social boundaries. International child welfare organizations have used insights from the Goler case to develop programs for identifying and assisting isolated families in rural regions worldwide. The Canadian government has shared data from its post-Goler reforms with other nations, showing that proactive welfare contact and education access can dramatically reduce generational abuse. Today, South Mountain is quiet. The old cabins collapsed long ago and have been reclaimed by nature. Wildflowers now grow where suffering once occurred. The site has become an unofficial place of reflection. Social workers, educators, and students sometimes visit to understand how such a tragedy could remain hidden for so long in a modern nation. Local schools in the Annapolis Valley use the case as a teaching tool. Students learn about social responsibility and the importance of protecting vulnerable populations. The lesson is clear: communities have a responsibility to watch for isolated families and ensure children have access to education and support. For the survivors, healing has been a lifelong journey. Many struggled with trust relationships and the lasting effects of childhood trauma. But with support, several built stable, independent lives. Some survivors changed their names to start fresh. Others kept the Goler name as a reminder of how far they had come. One survivor became a social worker herself, dedicating her life to helping children from similar backgrounds. Their resilience demonstrates something important: with proper support, survivors of even the most severe trauma can heal and thrive. The Goler case teaches us several critical lessons that remain relevant today. First, isolation is dangerous. When families or communities become completely cut off from education, healthcare, and social services, problems that could be addressed early can spiral into tragedies. Second, poverty requires active intervention. Simply knowing that poor families exist isn't enough. Communities must reach out, offer resources, and ensure children have access to education and healthcare. Third, education is protection. Schools serve as safety nets. When children attend school regularly, teachers can identify problems early and connect families with help. Fourth, reporting saves lives. When teachers, doctors, neighbors, or community members see warning signs, reporting concerns to authorities can prevent tragedy. Fifth, systemic change is possible. The reforms that followed the Goler case have protected countless children across Canada. When societies learn from failures, they can build better systems. Today, across Canada, stronger child protection systems exist because of what was learned from this case. Rural social workers now actively seek out isolated families rather than waiting for problems to be reported. Mobile education programs bring teachers to remote areas. Healthcare workers conduct regular welfare checks in isolated communities. The Goler children, though their individual names remain protected, reshaped an entire nation's approach to child welfare. Their suffering was not in vain. It created change that continues to protect vulnerable children today. The story of the Goler case is difficult to hear. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about what happens when society looks away from poverty and isolation. But it's also a story about positive change, about how one brave voice can break decades of silence, about how tragedy can spark meaningful reform, about how societies can learn from their failures and commit to doing better. The children who suffered on South Mountain deserve protection they never received. But their story ensured that future generations would have better safeguards. Every community has a responsibility to protect its most vulnerable members. This means watching for warning signs. It means not looking away from poverty or isolation. It means ensuring every child has access to education, healthcare, and safety. The lessons from South Mountain remain clear. Every child deserves to be seen. Every child deserves to be protected. Every child deserves the chance to heal and thrive. When we remember this story, we honor the survivors by committing to vigilance, compassion, and action. We promise that no child will be forgotten. We ensure that isolation never again becomes a breeding ground for tragedy. The mountain is quiet now, but its lesson echoes still. And that lesson continues to protect children across Canada and around the world. If you found this educational content valuable, consider sharing it with educators, social workers, or community leaders in your area. Understanding these lessons helps us all build safer communities for children. And remember, if you ever suspect a child is being neglected or abused, reporting your concerns to local authorities could save a life. You don't need proof. You just need to care enough to speak up. Together, we can ensure that every child is seen, protected, and given the opportunity for a safe and healthy childhood.